I haven't turned my camera on, have I?
Oh, you have not. Why have you not turned your camera on?
I don't
Oh,
know.
there he is.
Yes. Yeah, okay. Let's
There
try
he
it.
is. Sorry. I was
And
busy
take
looking
two.
at myself,
I
you
was
know.
staring at myself. How's my
You
hair
ever
look?
look
My
at
hair
you
look
ever
all
do
right?
Zooms or teams, and you're just like you're looking at yourself when you're talking, or is that just something a narcissist does?
That's I try not to look at myself at all. I usually in a Zoom meeting will turn my camera off. That way I can pretend like I'm paying attention. Welcome to another outrageous episode of the Show. We are two geeks who talk about everything. My name is Aaron, and I'm joined by my cousin and co-host Landon.
Good day. Here we are,
Here
another
we
week.
are. Another week, another dime, another dollar, another disaster. I don't know what we got going on. Today we are talking about the first half of the epic 12-issue DC Comics miniseries, Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Hmm,
Like the voice that
that was
give
really good.
toss. This story basically rebooted the entire DC universe, eliminated the known DC multiverse, and changed comic book history forever. It introduced us to the modern age of comics after so many years of Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, confusion and continuity, and then we just started over. So, Landon, what are your first impressions of the story? We're going to cover the first 6 issues in this episode. What do you think so far?
Well, I guess I would say this was multiverse before multiverse became a Marvel, multiverse, craze that we see now. Everybody's like, where'd all this multiverse stuff come from? And this stuff with the Crisis of Infinite Earths, this has all been done, and it's kind of the foundational aspect for me. I'm sure Marvel has done their own stuff with this, two-way before. And I don't know if it parallels, how they've done multiverse stuff, but I mean, this was my first exposure to any sort of idea of multiverse, monitor, anti-monitor. I mean, this is my this is where I guess got my foundation, my palette, for this kind of stuff. What about you?
So, looking back, I remember, as a kid collecting comics. I didn't start collecting comics until several years after the crisis occurred, and but I would read like in like Wizard magazine. They would refer to comics as either pre-crisis or post-crisis,
That's right.
and
Yeah.
it was almost like Crisis on Infinite Earths became this mark in time for comic book history, where
Right.
like almost like the birth of Jesus became, it's you're either BC or AD
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
what year you're in.
That's exactly right. Well, and all this was happening when I mean, we were too young to read it when it first came out, but because of that pre-crisis, post-crisis, obviously, we both went back and read, and we found later that there would be ties as we got older, ties back to this,
Mhm.
um, which we'll talk about probably in the next episode. But I mean, you had to go back and read it, because it came, and it was honestly the art was older. It was an older time to what we grew up with in the 90s, but it was still a compelling story.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, the scope of the story is massive. You've got so many characters involved. Even if they're characters that just have cameos, it's amazing. Excuse me, I don't know where this all came from. I'm all choked up. You know what?
Emotional.
Universes are dying. Yeah, right. You got worlds dying, worlds surviving, whatever. Um, what's amazing is you've got George Perez here, who's the artist on the entire series. He does such an amazing job of bringing in so many random characters. And let's give credit to Mark Wolfman too, the writer. I'm sure they collaborated on, all right, who are we going to have step in here? They're not going to have any lines. They're not going to say anything. We're just going to see them either in action or standing in the background, whatever. And Perez just has this. amazing ability to draw these huge rooms just full of
Mm.
dozens, maybe even 100 different characters, just standing around each other. You get the first taste of that in the first issue when the Monitor gathers heroes and villains from all over the multiverse to kind of stand against the Anti-Monitor before you really know what's going on. Here's just all of these random characters that just show up out of nowhere, and again, it's just amazing to see you've got this entire catalog of characters from DC's at this point 50-year history
Yeah.
um that may have shown up once or twice 30 years ago, and here they are playing some important role in this multiversal crossover story. It's just so crazy how it spans the entire history of what was then the DC multiverse. Um, so as a setup, what did you think about like the origin of finding out who the Monitor is and then his adversary, the Anti-Monitor?
Um, so that, I mean, honestly, I would say the probably the I'm not as influenced by the origin of the Monitor or the Monitor as much as I was impacted by the deaths that happen actually through the
Mm.
storyline. Um, because we'll get to them, but it's just there were just things that happened and I'm like, "What?" Because it's really large characters. I was affected a lot by the flip on the Luther, like Alexander Luther Jr., being like a good guy. I'm
Right.
just like it just blows my mind. Just the story starts off with him. And so anyway, but you would tell me what your thoughts are about that.
Like you brought up Luther. It's so crazy. There we see the destruction of Earth 3 in this story. So for those out there who aren't aware of what's happening in this multiverse, like the Anti-Monitor has sent this wave of antimatter that is one by one systemically just destroying uh different universes throughout the multiverse, right?
Yeah,
And it's random. It's not in any order. It's not in the order that DC Comics has uh their worlds labeled. Like Earth 1, Earth 2, Earth 3. Um, it just happens based on or what does the story serve. And so Earth 3 is the home to the not to just justice, the crime syndicate of America. It's basically the opposite of our world, where all the heroes are villains. Superman, the version of Superman over there is an evil guy named Ultraman. Wonder Woman is
Ultraman,
evil
right,
Superwoman.
right,
Uh, Batman is the evil Owlman, etc. And the only hero in that world is Lex Luthor, and he's married to Lois Lane.
right,
And so when that world is destroyed, um, and there's a chance for their newborn son Alexander Luther Jr. to be saved. It's very emblematic of Superman being sent from Krypton
right,
to Earth. Uh, Luther has been exposed to the multiverse in the past. He's done his research, and at this point, he's created this machine that will basically encapsulate his newborn child and send him to Earth 1. And so from there, we have this Alexander Luther character who becomes key to the story moving forward. He ages quickly, becomes an adult basically throughout the story, but his story becomes much more important later on.
right.
Right. But yeah, so
You got to
it's
love the hair.
crazy
Got
to
to
know.
love
Oh
that.
my gosh,
You
yeah,
got to love the
that
red
is
hair. I mean, that was
the and it's curly and it's a mullet. I mean, is there anything more 80s than that? All right, so let's see. All right, so we get to go back to the beginning of time. We see the Big Bang. It sets up the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor as cosmic forces that are battling for supremacy. So we're tracing the Monitor's plan to recruit heroes and villains to help save the multiverse, and that's basically your classic crossover material mantra or whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
So I want to talk about some of the heroes that are involved. You've definitely got the classic Justice League lineup. You got the big three: Batman,
Right.
Superman, Wonder Woman, from multiple universes. Like we've got
Oh,
Superman
you
from
got the
Earth One.
Flash.
You've
You
got
got the
Sorry,
Flash.
go ahead.
I was just gonna say you got the Flash who quickly gets imprisoned. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
Barry Allen is the Flash at this point. He's the one that has been the Flash since the 1960s. It was Barry Allen's introduction that it issued in the Silver Age of comics. And then we've also got obscure characters like Dawnstar, like I mentioned before.
Oh yeah.
Dawnstar from the Legion of Superheroes, and then tons of other cameos that I was actually, when I was doing some more research beyond reading the actual story on the DC fandom wiki page, uh, it goes through and lists all of the characters who appear in the book. And it's literally like this list that you just keep on scrolling down. Like there's so many people to show up. What are your thoughts on all these characters that just randomly appear?
I mean, I thought it was kind of cool. The idea of everybody coming together in one huge arc. I don't know, had there been any previous arc this big of this magnitude prior?
Never this big. Now there
Okay.
was it was an annual event for Justice League and Justice Society to get together. And then
Like
I think
little
it was
team ups. There would be team
right.
ups, but
It
nothing
was
like
like
full.
every the end of the year, every December, every January, something like that. There was always the first one was Crisis on Earth 2.
Right.
Then there was Crisis on Earth 3, where they introduced the crime syndicate. Then there was Crisis on Earth X, the world where World War II, I think, was either still going on or the Germans won World War II.
And it
And so,
continued on or something like that. Yeah.
yeah. And so,
Yeah.
like, you've got evil Nazi versions of superheroes, but then you've got the freedom fighters like Uncle
Right.
Sam
Right.
and
Right. Right.
the Ray and all those characters. And so a lot of those Crisis annual events were ways for DC to introduce new characters
Right.
that weren't necessarily new characters. They were just characters that they had absorbed in
Right.
taking over other comic book companies.
Right.
So
Right.
like I mentioned, Uncle Sam, those characters came from, I want to say Charlton Comics, or maybe that's where Blue Beetle came from.
But it allowed
But
them
there's
to
also Shazam.
consolidate. It allowed consolidation altogether and then putting in, and then ultimately it also, as DC does every once in a while, allowed them to kind of clean house. I
Right.
mean, that's really what, aside from just having an epic storyline, which I think is great, to me, and I don't know if you agree, this was like a concerted effort to clean house.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Um, I think at one point, the writers and the editors, they were looking at the writing on the wall and they saw that there's so much convoluted continuity here, and there's so many different worlds out there in the multiverse that we don't really have a grasp on everything that's going on, and all of these stories we've been telling, they just don't connect. There is the continuity is a mess, guys. We've
Yeah.
got all these different worlds. Let's bring all of these characters together and just bring them to one place. And so that's what they do. What it boils down to is they initially get the multiverse pared down to 5 Earths. All right. So
Yeah.
you've got 1, 2, 4, S, and
X.
X.
X. Yeah.
And so Earth S is where the Shazam family is from. Earth X is what we mentioned, where the Freedom Fighters are from. Earth 4 is where you'd find like Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, those characters that had come from maybe that one's Charlton Comics. I can't remember. But anyway, so you've got these 5 worlds. So they're trying to consolidate where you've got the Golden Age heroes existed and still exist, and they have their children, and like the Infinity Inc. where Power Girl and Jade and Obsidian, all them. And then Earth 1 is where you've got your main storylines happening. And
Yeah.
so it's like, well, let's just bring them all together, smash them into one world so that all of these characters can have a shared history and have adventures together
Yeah.
instead of, making up some excuse to move into some other dimension to meet with Blue Beetle and Captain Atom.
Yeah.
So you got those 5 worlds that they managed to save. And that's what happens. I was gonna say one of the big things that happens is the death of the Monitor, and it feels like
Yes.
that's pretty early on.
By
Harbinger,
Harbinger. Yeah.
she's been working for the Monitor all this time, but the Anti-Monitor, um, I want to say, like, puts her in a trance or something, like
Yeah.
controls her and
Yeah.
has her kill the Monitor, and
Yeah.
it's
No.
not something
Yeah. It
she
was
wants to do.
completely. It was taking over. Yeah. It was. It was
Right.
being influenced.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was definitely it. I was going to
But
ask
his
you.
sacrifice
Go
paves
ahead.
the way for her to be able to save those other 3 universes,
Because he had
SX and
foreseen that
4.
this was going to happen. That's the other
Right.
part of it too, is the Monitor knew he was going to die and
Yeah.
was going to use his death to try to bring like this. Um, I guess it allowed it to sustain, or the universes to sustain and sync, I suppose, right?
Right. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, killing off such a major character, especially that early in the story, do you think it raised the stakes even a little bit?
I think it was the good part about it was, had they not done that, it would have been like, okay, who's this guy? And now we're all of a sudden going to, everybody's going to rally. We're used to Superman being the hero. Now we have anti-heroes being heroes. Now we have all these different people coming together. We have Alexander Luthor Jr., who's a good guy on some of the Earth. It's a lot going on. I think it would have been bad to have some person who is just like the leader throughout the whole thing that everybody's following, be someone. Everybody's already invested in Superman. Everybody's already invested in Batman, Wonder Woman, Flash, and all that. So having a character come in that's almost like foretelling this danger that everybody's got to go to that dies is kind of like the Obi-Wan way. Is Obi-Wan. He dies at and then Luke has to take it from there. I think it was good, well placed.
That's a good point. That's a good I guess a good story trope that you can throw in there. You've got this wise, infinitely um knowledgeable being that's supposed to, yeah, bring us all together and have us have all of our heroes and villains unite to save reality. And then he dies. And it's like,
Right.
oh crap, what do we do now?
Right. Right.
And yeah, you see it too with in Avengers with the death of Coulson, right?
Right.
He's basically the reason that team gelled at
Yeah,
all.
they all got together.
Uh, it's like, all right, now we have something to fight for. Um, yeah, so yeah, all of this that's going on. It's a great setup for what's to come in the second half of the miniseries. You got 5 worlds remaining, and really they're on the brink of destruction as it is, because the way they explain it is, each of these worlds exists in the same time, the same place. It's just they are on a different vibrational wavelength.
Yeah.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah, I mean
Uh,
like a radio, it's
yeah.
all it's different place or same location but different. Yeah,
Which is basically how the Flash is able to travel from one world to another, is that
exactly.
he basically can vibrate himself to a certain frequency, and
Frequency.
then
That's
bam,
exactly right.
he is on a different world. And he's been doing that for decades. That's how they introduced Earth 1 to Earth 2. Was one day he was out running and happened to find himself, instead of in Central City, in Keystone City, which is the home of the Golden Age Flash.
Yes.
And that was how they had their first adventure together, the tale of two Flashes. It was that was where they introduced the idea of the multiverse, and then it became a mess. All right, so we want to say there are these 5 worlds are on the brink of destruction because their vibrational frequencies are coming into sync with each other. And as we know from physics, no two things can exist in the same
And
place
moment,
and
and
time.
place. Yep.
And so, if they're vibrating on different frequencies, but then those frequencies come together and they become the same frequency, these five worlds are going to collide and basically destroy each other. And so that's where we're left at the end of the first six issues. Now, behind the scenes, Crisis is masterminded. We already mentioned by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. What do you think of these two guys? We had previously they had collaborated on the new Teen Titans, which was a huge success back in the '80s.
Yeah, I mean, my only exposure had been reading this, but I don't know much else. Tell me.
So if you want to go back and read a really good story, check out with New Teen Titans the um shoot, what's it called? Dang it. The Judas Contract. That's it.
Oh,
Uh
okay.
it is so good. It's a little disturbing at times. But that's the storyline where we get Deathstroke going after the Teen Titans.
Okay.
Um, it's the storyline where Dick Grayson, Robin, uh, hangs up the old suit and becomes Nightwing
Oh,
for the first
nice.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good story. It's you have a character who is a part of the Titans. I won't tell you who it is in case of spoilers. But that person turns out to be in cahoots with Deathstroke and is a traitor. It's a
I
really
watched the show
fascinating
on
story.
HBO, so or Max. So that's the closest thing that I know
They
about
changed
the
it.
Titans.
They
They
changed it on
changed it.
there.
They did different. Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
I was glad they did differently because that was one of those things where I was like, are they going to do it the same? Is it no? It's going to be
Oh,
different. And so Young Justice did they sort of adapted the story a little bit, but it was slightly different. So I think if I'm remembering right, the traitor is a different person.
okay.
Uh, when if you go back and read the comics,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, they I love how these two guys, were able to work together again on this. The story is epic. Perez's art is gorgeous. I think with so many different characters. Like I said, I don't know of too many artists who are able to do the same thing where you can have a room full of so many different characters and distinctly tell who's who. Um, and I think it's cool how they were able to expand on their collaboration with New Teen Titans.
That's
Uh,
awesome.
so so the story, obviously we've talked about it. It's known for consolidating the DC multiverse into one universe. Do you feel like this reboot was necessary for DC at the time? And in your opinion, what do you think of the impact it had on DC continuity moving forward?
I feel like it was good to do a revamp. I think that you and I would I think we've talked before about this where you got to be careful how many times you do revamps, so you got but because it gets to be so, oh, every few years we'll just have a new lineup, or anything
Right.
like that. I like that there's tie-ins. I appreciated when Infinite Crisis came along, because that happened when we were older, to be able to read it. Um, so that's an okay tie-in. The challenge that you have is when you have different timelines, different storylines, and then decades are going by with characters that are pretty much staying the same, but the technology and the world around them is changing, then you've got a problem and you have to do something, per se. So I have a challenge with Superman, for example, because when you look at Superman, having a son now, and he's aging and he's getting older, logically it makes sense and you just want to revamp it. But I also don't want Superman to be this, now. I want him to be my Dan Jurgens, Superman, in the 90s, but I just can't have it. So, you know, I approach any sort of these revamps, and as necessary. I get it. Sometimes it's a bit of a shame. In this case, it seemed like them doing Crisis of Infinite Earth was wise, and it kind of had to happen if you wanted to have epic continuity. With with Marvel having Infinity Gauntlet or the Infinity Gauntlet stuff happening, in the 90s, it just seemed like, if you want to have epic journeys and battles with crossovers and everybody loves that kind of stuff, then you're going to have to do it, but also clean house in the process. And not everybody's going to enjoy what's going to happen to some of their characters who they were enjoying following a certain storyline for a while.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's a trade-off.
yeah. And once you mentioned what you mentioned about like it makes sense to have stories where like Superman's kid grows up and some of these characters they age. You expect them to age because years and years and years pass. Um but at the same time they're ageless, right? You don't want your core characters. Bruce Wayne is always going to be Batman, and it has been Batman since 1938, but he's
Right,
not 120 years old going
right,
around in a bat suit punching the Joker in the face.
right.
Uh, this is, I mean, we're talking about you want to have the reality of your characters aging and evolving with the world around them, but at the same time you want them to remain the same age and forever 30 years old and able to do the job that they are doing as heroes. And it's almost like, well, how do we have our cake and eat it too?
Well,
Right.
exactly. You just can't. You can't have it all. Unless you just have them. The only way that you can keep it the same is if you're going to treat it like it's an episode of Law and Order or CSI or something where, sure there might be overarching plot points to a season, but the point of the show is an individual case that's happening. And if
Right.
if your focus is that, then yeah, you can perpetually just constantly have that and no aging because it's each crime Batman solving, each case, each little arc, or Superman's fighting each new thing. But that's typically not what's happening. There's more like involved in their progression. I mean, Superman or Clark Kent and Lois get married. At one point, it was the progression of their relationship. Before, she has no idea who he is. Now she knows. Time advances. Now they're married. Then they're going to have a kid, or what's going to happen. It's just you. If you do life events as you would have, and you go down that, then you are obligated now to follow it to the conclusion of them getting older or dying.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it,
And no
it,
one
it
wants that to
depends
happen.
on nobody wants it to happen. So you can't have both. If you're going to do serials, cool. Then you can forever have serials. If you're going to have, like a dramatic plot, that's going to be about their lives and continuity, then But one other thing I wanted to bring up is you always have different comic books that are more or less popular at any certain time based upon public opinion and feel. And so one challenge can be is you could have a rockin' storyline going with a certain character, and then you have the entire comic book franchise wanting to, be done with something. And so some fans could look at some and go, yeah, that was getting stale. You know, this arc was getting stale. But then another one could be going forward firm and just like, I loved what we were in. Why are we no, no, don't revamp. I don't want to revamp. And I think that's sometimes what we face or we have faced along the way, at least for me with Batman and Superman.
Yeah. And I'm sure writers, editors are always faced with the challenge of, you can't please all the people all the time.
Sure.
It's just it's an impossible task, but they try. And uh, sometimes they have more success than others, and sometimes they make just, I don't know, these behind the scenes decisions that just make fans will look at history of the publication and be like, what were you thinking? I mean, what's happening here?
Did you?
um
Let me ask you real quick before we move on, because I should have mentioned this earlier. Isn't it funny that Pariah's name is Pariah?
oh yeah.
I'm
Well,
just like Pariah. Like what? Did you choose this before you became a pariah? I mean, how did this happen? That you actually are a pariah. You
yeah.
did cause this whole thing, but I mean, did this start off like being like an annoyance on the old kickball team? I mean, was it like how did it become that you became not a social pariah but a universal pariah? You know. But I always thought that was funny, that name. That's the first time I
Sorry
heard
for
it.
the guy.
Yeah, sorry, Brian.
I
You're Brian.
mean, yeah, he made a mistake, but come on. Does he have to watch every universe die and do nothing about it?
Yes.
All right. We're just halfway through the story. Things are looking dire and so much destruction across the multiverse. What well, I'm not gonna ask you what your predictions are for the second half. You've already read it. But just for the sake of our listeners, how do you think our heroes are gonna prevail against the anti-monitor?
I think our heroes are going to face some sacrifices. I think I
Oh, it
think
gets sad
things
here really quick.
yeah. I think uh I think there's some coming to reality that has to happen for them to be able to make things survive. Sacrifices happen. I think you're going to be left with some people that you got to figure out what to do with because you're not just going to write them off and or kill them. So what are you going to do with certain people? So well, I look forward to talking about that. What about you?
Uh yeah, yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot that's gonna happen. We're going to have to say goodbye to some pretty important characters that have made their mark on the history of comic books, and well, we'll just leave it at that. It'll be exciting to see how this whole thing concludes. And we'll be covering that second half in our very next episode. That's all the time we've got for now. I wanted to thank our listeners for joining us in geeking out over Crisis on Infinite Earths. If you have not read this story, um, I mean, come back next time, but beware, you will be getting all the spoilers for the end of the story and then what comes next. And so, yeah, if you got a chance to read it, you can find it in so many different collected versions over the years. And if you happen to be online, there are ways you can read it digitally through places like Amazon or Comixology or DC Universe Infinite, which is a subscription service. You can go check out a lot of the back catalog of DC Comics.
That's what both Aaron and I do. We have the DC Infinite, and I mean, you really can see any comic book anytime. Read story arcs. It's well worth it for me because I can always just kind of quickly look back. I mean, I love a physical comic book. Don't get me wrong, but it's a really great app to be able to go through comics.
I agree. I agree. It's fantastic. All right, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get notified whenever we throw up any content here. Um, come back for more comic book discussions and casual banter about all things nerdy and fun. And until next time, have a great whatever it is, wherever you are.